Johnny, greetings and salutations, and all of you out there in live land, whatever we call it, live streaming land. And no, we appreciate everybody checking in with us and being here. Plus you that came. Wow, I've got taste of fall. Things are going a little good today, this week, huh? Right? Kind of relief, but let's just, Lord, 3 months of this and we'll be fine. And we're ready for spring then. Let's just get through the winter with this kind of weather. 80s would be great with me. I appreciate you coming tonight, and hopefully that, as Cale encourages to, that we're saying, here's my heart, O Lord, speak now to me. Speak truth to me. If you will, let's bow and let's ask. God and Father, just I humbly bow. Just so amazes me that you, and I often say this, but that you even want to listen. And yet you are the one that says, ask. You're the one that says, seek. And you're the one that says, knock. So you invite us, not just to receive you as Lord and Savior, not just stand at the door and knock. I mean, you over and over and over again, you keep wanting in because we have this tendency to keep setting you out. And we don't intend to. It just seems like we kind of lose track of the fact that you're the one that gives us our life, our breath, and everything else. And God, when I stop and think about that, it just about takes that breath away. The whole reality that, we go on like we've always been and just breathing and going until the doctor says, oops, we got a problem. And the truth is, God, you're the one that has given it from the beginning because you've invested in our physical life because you were concerned about our spiritual soul. And yet it wasn't just us, but you even sent us to this earth that not only that we would discover and choose you, but that through our lives that other people would discover and choose you. And that just, again, takes my breath away. What a absolute huge and humongous type of a calling, Lord, on our lives. But there's not one in this room tonight that you don't want to use that way. That each of us, in spite of our faults and in spite of our sins, in spite of, Lord, our past and in spite of what we did today, that you still want to use us to reveal to others that you are a real God. And so we do come tonight, Lord, not to earn anything from you, but out of what you've already done for us. We come tonight, Lord, just if nothing else, to become more aware of your presence. We come because we want to know what your truth actually says. And I pray that we come tonight, Lord, not with just our heads open to gain knowledge so that we can answer questions or whatever, but rather instead that our hearts would be open with our heads, that we would have a knowledge that, Lord, we breathe into our lives and that we show through our hands and in the way that we speak and care for others. God and Father, tonight we ask that you would speak to us and speak truth to us, that you would inspire us as well as, Lord, direct us, correct us, and whatever you see that we need. And I'm thankful that, Lord, over time we begin to learn that you're not a taskmaster. You're just the master. And you're the master that can take the most menial of tasks and suddenly make them eternal. And we give you thanks for that. So I pray that you would speak to me and through me tonight, Lord, for each of my brothers and sisters here, for everyone that's listening in, that there would be something out of this, Lord, that they would need, and that would suddenly, Lord, understand that you're looking at them and you're saying, hey, I know exactly where you are. This one's for you. In Jesus' name, amen. So we've been looking at this passage in Revelation, redundancy over and over and over again. Look at the primary thing, and some of you may be at that point where it's like, okay, I get the picture. And it's not just about getting the picture, it's about getting the picture but understanding also, and as I was trying to say Sunday, how to read yourself into Scripture, how to read yourself into the story so that you begin to feel it and live it and breathe it. And that suddenly, instead of it just being facts and figures, it all of a sudden becomes a life that's being portrayed before you. John, I believe, had trouble with this because as he wrote this thing of Revelation, I'm sure even as he went back and looked at what he had written down, and I just have to wonder, I mean, unless God superseded and intervened in a tremendous way, can you imagine how long it would have taken, even if any one of us would sit down and try to write this out by hand? Let alone John didn't have a ballpoint pen or a nice fancy marker or great stationery or anything like that. Man, as far as we know, he was grabbing whatever he could to find there in prison, various things that would make the ink and finding something that would etch it into, be it a piece of leather, and because they wouldn't have had just regular paper like this. Papyrus was around, but man, I don't know that it was available to the prisoners in prison, because I seriously doubt that they were given something every month. Here, you can write home and tell your mom about what's going on. And so just, even if you had the best and you had a piece of paper, a notebook, and you had a pen, can you imagine how long this would have taken? Because we know it began with John. He was caught up in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I wonder what day he came back down. Man, I mean, it would have taken quite a while for this to be unveiled, and then to put into words what you were seeing, what you were hearing, and describing it as much as he has. No wonder we've got questions. He only did the best he could with what he had at the time. And yet within it, God didn't just pick John randomly. I believe that, number one, he picked him because he'd been faithful to the end. And that as far as anybody knew, this was the last apostle still alive. I'm not sure exactly if he outlived Paul, but I believe that he did. But of the 12 that followed Jesus minus Judas, so those 11, and then with Matthias that they picked up, but he was the last one still alive. He was the one that not only was still alive, but he was put there because he wouldn't shut up about Jesus. And so he had been a faithful witness and continued to tell and explain and let other people know. So he was exiled because of this, because the Romans just had to find a way to shut him up. But as John writes this, he had to have done like any one of us would have done, and that would have been putting this picture into either his current circumstances or his past experiences, right? That's how we relate to things. Somebody goes to tell a story, and you go, oh, I know, that was like the time when right? We kind of do that. And so I'm sure as John was writing that it wasn't like he was in this trance, spazzing out or anything. Instead, as he goes to writing, I'm sure he was like us, trying to just, how do I, one, put this into words, and then what does it mean? And so when he comes to 21, the last 2 chapters that he's about to write, and he doesn't know that it's about to be over, but as he comes to us, and the first thing that he's told to do is to write down there was, when the earth expired, when it died, so to speak, when it was buried, when it was gone, when it was destroyed, the heavens and the earth were destroyed. Along with it went the sea. But John began, as far as we know, what was he originally? He was a man of the sea. He was a fisherman. And so when the sea is gone, and that's what kind of prompted this, as I tried to, okay, God, give me some insight here and help me. I mean, what is there? What's said that's not said? That was what it began to hit me with, is that John would have just been kind of taken aback when he couldn't imagine there was no longer any more sea, because he'd made his living there. And we know that there are 2 kinds of seas, and the one that he spent the most around was the Sea of Galilee. And it's not the sea like we tend to think with ocean bodies, because ocean bodies have what kind of water? Salt water. Now, there were saltwater bodies there, and over on the other side of things around Nazareth and around Galilee and everything was the Great Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and I believe that it is a saltwater body, or a salt body of water. It's got salt in it anyway, put it that way. And then the Sea of Galilee, though, is more like in the United States our Great Lakes, and that they are big bodies of water, but they're not salt. They're pure. And we know that those are because most of it's from the runoff from what? The snow and the ice melting and coming on down. And but they're beautiful lakes nonetheless. And this lake, or the Sea of Galilee, Lake of Gennesaret is also another one of it. Sea of Tiberias, I believe, was another one of the names for it. It gets kind of confusing, but it depends on what period of time and who the people were and where they lived on it, what they called it. But it's all one same, this body of water, the Sea of Galilee. And so it would have not been a saltwater body, but I just want to think about water in general. And a few things that came to my mind as I was taking this trip to the water with God was that, one thing I think that many of us, if not most all of us, would agree is that isn't it beautiful to look at? I mean, there's something serene about getting to the ocean or the Gulf of Mexico or anything this big. I mean, I grew up, the only body of water that was close to us next to Jones's Pond was the Mississippi River. And there's places where it's very, very wide, and all in that regard. It depends on what time of the year, because it gets wider and wider as the rains come down in the spring. But it's known as the Big Muddy Mississippi. And it is one ugly river, and you can ski on everything like that, but kind of like Altoona, I wouldn't want to drink the water. I'd probably rather drink water out of the Mississippi than I would this lake of ours right over here. But nonetheless, anyway, that was what I had to go with, and nobody really sat on it. I mean, there still is some phenomenal thing to it because it is powerful and mighty. But at the same time, It's not one of those that's kind of like the ocean where when you look at it, and especially if it's got the nice white sandy beach and it has that blue and green look to it and everything like that way, there's something amazing about it. And it's why a lot of people want to go to the beach and people want to live there as well. But we know although it can be beautiful, it can also be what? Scary. Very scary. Depending on what kind of wind is behind it. And suddenly then, this that you love, all of a sudden it changes colors and it goes into this darker gray and the blacks and different things like that. And it's like, whoa. And that's when you want to run from the water and get, inland as far as you can, as it recently has happened with these hurricanes and all. But as a whole, water's very beautiful. It's not only that, but when it comes to the seas, it's also kind of rhythmic, right? It's got a rhythm to it. And that in and out of the waves. And I've never tried to time it, and I don't know what it has to do with anything other than you just hear it kind of begin to boil, and whoosh, and it goes back, and then pretty soon it does it again. And some people, they love to sleep to that. It doesn't do anything for me that way. It doesn't make me sleepy, but it's just kind of, it's a curious thing to me. How's that work? I mean, is God out there splashing his feet in it that's making it do that, the ripple effect, or what is it that does that? And then if you want to get even more intrigued, stop and think about the water and with the tide and how it comes in and how it goes out, how they can set things according to it. And it has something to do with the moon and all like this. But to me, it's still pretty just kind of freaky, isn't it? How does that work? And then there's not only those kind of things, but then with the water, there's also a life-giving property to it, especially if it's a place when you're thirsty and it's not a salt body, but you can get your water from it. It's not only that, but they found out that water could be used as a powerful source. And so like on rivers and all, they'll put the old mills, that would go ahead and take advantage of the current that was flowing. And the sea, there's certain things that they've done that way to try to harvest energy out of the sea. And then there's the plant life in the sea that's phenomenal in and of itself, and how you'll take most plants, and at least Julie does, and she puts water on them and they die. I can't imagine submerging plants in water and them living. How does that work? But God did the designing, so it does. And so some of these plants are there where you can see them, and others you can't see them unless you go down way deep, and they're still alive. And how in the world is something as hard as coral, that's a rock, so to speak, is still a living being? So the sea is phenomenal, and this isn't National Geographic here or anything that way, and I don't have a film we're about to see. But I'm just saying, I just want us to expand our mind and think suddenly about some of this stuff with the sea and the water that we just kind of take for granted. And most of us didn't grow up on it. I won't say all of you didn't, but most of us didn't grow up on it. And some of you got to go to it once a year or twice a year, whatever. And some of you then now have got places on it. And the rest of us are jealous. But John grew up on it. And he grew up seeing this. And I talked about the plant life. Well, what about the fish life? The aquatic life that goes on in water? I mean, isn't it phenomenal? I mean, some of the colors that there are, and again, some of the best and most vivid colors are way down deep where the sun doesn't even shine. And the faces and the just strange bodies, let alone the duck-billed platypus, Got to be careful how I say that then. But, there's all these kind of creatures. And what I'm getting at is the fact that, man, this water isn't just water. I mean, it's so much more than that. It's got all these properties that go along with it. And the funny part of it is, too, in one way, it's a huge barrier, right? Because if you can't swim and you don't have a boat, what do you do with water? You stop at the edge of it unless you're a real good swimmer. But on the other hand, the water is a great way to take heavy, heavy loads and to move them much more easily than you could ever come up with a wheel and move them or roll them or have enough oxen or whatever at the time, or even today, enough trucks to move the stuff. I mean, that's why all these shipping containers, from China over to here, they use those great big, huge boats that have how many? I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of those shipping containers on it. Weigh millions of pounds, but they transport them that way. So water, this thing that is a barrier, also becomes a way to get places. And so it's just an intriguing thing to me. And when our earth is covered with 2/3 to 3/4 water, and some of it very cold and ice, but it's covered with that, what all did God do with it? He really expressed his great imagination. And so when John starts looking at this and talking about this and realizing there's no more sea, I think that suddenly he has a different perspective on it. I don't know about going to a place where there's no more sea because it's passed away. So when we look at John, that's why I went back and started going through the various passages that have water in it. And I told you last week we had one more to go. And so let's go, if we will, back to John chapter 21. And this was the last story that we have recorded in our Bible of Jesus on the water. And he's not walking on it this time. He's just there. He just kind of shows up somewhat miraculously, just for a quick picker-upper so that you're kind of aware of things. I mean, what took place here was that this is after the resurrection of Christ, after the crucifixion and the resurrection we talked about last week. And he'd already appeared to his disciples, but he didn't appear and stay. He showed up. He came back a week later. He appeared to two guys on the road to Emmaus. We know that he went and saw James, his brother, somewhere along the line, all according to 1 Corinthians 15. He also appeared to 500 believers all at one time, so there were many, many witnesses. But John experiences something here, and it's kind of in a position of transfer, I guess you could say. I mean, I know there's a better word than that, but they're kind of like caught here at the fork in the road, so to speak. And which way are we going to go? I mean, Jesus had been with them. It's all they had known. They'd even experienced and had miracles done through them. They'd watched Jesus do just the most amazing things, which absolutely had to be Lord of Lords. But because of their human thinking, they continually presumed that Jesus was going to set up an earthly kingdom here like David had. And so they were so just assuming that this is what's going to take place, that when it didn't, it rocked their world. So not only did they lose the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings on a cross, and he didn't do anything about it, and he stopped Peter from fighting for him. Not only did he die, and he's back from the dead, and they're excited about that, and that's great, but what do we do now? And it's like Jesus is back, but he's not the same as he was. And it's this glorified body, and he can go through walls, but he can still eat fish. And he proved that. He could be touched as well as seen. But he could go right through a wall. I mean, it's just kind of weird. And then he would just disappear. And I think it would be kind of maybe even a little bit haunting. But if I'd have been Jesus, I'd have sure had fun if I could do that. You know, I'd have fun if I could do that right now, man. I mean, I'd show up and you'd think I'm here, and the next thing you know, he's gone, and I'd sit in behind you and go, what are you texting there anyway, huh? You know, and, oh, sorry, you know, but can you just imagine? And Jesus, I'll bet you we'll find out that he did play with it just a little bit, just to have some fun. And this is one of those that he may have been doing it at. But when he finally, you know, not finally, but when he just didn't go ahead and get them together and have a conference, and he didn't all meet at Jerusalem and say, hey, call everybody in. And he didn't say, okay, guys, let me spell it all out. He just kind of left them hanging in the lurch to do like what happens to us when we lose our direction or our way and things don't work out the way that we think. You got to go back and remember what he said. What had he told them? What had they told him? And so Peter, in the midst of this confusion with his own life, feeling like a failure, unworthy, he speaks up, and that's what we read about here in 21 verse 1. After Jesus appeared again to his disciples afterward Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. So he starts this 21 with telling about Jesus showing up, but he didn't just show up and then they came. Here's how it happened, okay? It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, that was his rapper name, Didymus. Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee. Who were they? James and John that's writing this, okay? The son of Zebedee and two other disciples were together. Poor guys got left out altogether. John didn't remember who they were. Peter says, so they're together. Together what? Talking about what's happened, talking about what do we do now? Maybe just together thinking, Jesus, you going to show up today or not? He didn't show up. So Peter says, I'm going out to fish. Now, he says I'm going out to fish, but what he's really kind of saying here is I'm going back to fish. Because that's what he had done before Jesus ever showed up. Simon Peter told them, and after he told them this, they all said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. And I'm curious here because I wonder, I know that they left it all, and I'm wondering, did they go back to one of the boats that they'd used before? Did they go rent a boat? Did they just go take a boat that was sitting, or what? But I kind of like in my mind to imagine that they went back to where they used to fish on this Sea of Galilee, and as they go back, they took the tarp off that was half eaten through with the wind and the rain and different things that hit it, but there's the boat. And they checked it, and there weren't any holes in it. There's the oars. There's the nets. I wonder if they're going to... And so I basically see them going back to business, because before Jesus had come into their lives, that's how they earned their living. It's how they fed their families. The boating end of things was a variety of things to them. It was a way of life, I would presume, don't know, but maybe that's what their dads did, and they passed it on down. I know that some of the people that I've met that are fishermen, aren't I'm not talking about the ones at the resorts that are commercial fishermen that way. I'm talking about the old salty sailors that they're third and fourth generation sailors. They've been out on that water for years, and they're weathered, and you can see it. And they know this and they know that, and there's some things that scare them. There's some things, oh, well, we've seen this before. And they go out and try and have to keep going out further and further to find whatever it is they're looking for, but you can guarantee one thing, they bring back the best stuff. So I don't know if there were several generations of Peter, James, and John kind of guys, But Peter says, I think I'm going to go back to fishing. They didn't have anything else better to do. We'll go with you. So they dig out the boat. Then they get things loaded up. I don't know if they took refreshments with them like most of the fishermen I know today. I just know they didn't have to worry about putting gas in that boat because it was going to be the old-fashioned style. They're just going to have to row out or maybe hoist a sail. And they go out, and they started fishing. Now, I wish we had more information. I think this would be a cool story to know. Did this happen at 10:30 in the morning? And it was evening by the time that they finally got the boat ready. That's how it would be in my life. How about you? I mean, nothing ever just goes together, especially if it's been sitting for a while. Maybe they did have to plug a few holes and get rid of a few termites, but nonetheless, anyway, and I'm just trying to get you, stimulate your imagination so much as just I want you to think of what it would be like to be Peter and John here. Because there's a part of it that you go back to what you used to do, and it's like a familiarity. Okay, I can get my bearings straight. At least I know how to do this. But if you're doing something that you're not supposed to do, there's also a weirdness to it that it just doesn't feel altogether right. Fair to say? Because inside, it's like, it doesn't feel the same way it used to feel. I was expecting, you go back and you do, I thought I'd have that thrill again. I mean, it's like going back to high school reunion. You get together with your buddies and you start, and after a while, it's like, we know these stories. We lived through them. And it's not the same, or they're not the same, because we've all changed. So these guys go out, and it's a frat party, so to speak, but not a party like weird and crazy, but I'm just saying they think they're going to get back into their way of life again, have a good time. You know what? We've been on pins and needles at this Jesus thing now. I mean, not only did we spend the 3.5 years, but boy, the last 30 days have been crazy. He comes and goes. What's he want? I mean, he's not telling us anything. What's he want us to do? And again, I'm going to repeat. What do you do when you don't know what to do? You go back and remember what somebody told you, or whoever it is that you're concerned about. What was the last thing they told you to do? And then you go back really into your mind and you go, what was the last thing you told them you would do? I'm going to share that with you because, you see, there are things that happen in your lives and mine. I don't know that I could put on the same level, but for you it may be like them losing Jesus, Jesus coming back, but hey, it's still not the same as walking with him and having him tell you what to do. Insecurity. Something's not right. Something's not in place. And when you begin to feel that frustration, or all the things that you used to count on are gone, it's real easy to go back and do something that you used to be able to count on. And that's where some of the people I've had the opportunity of meeting and working with, that it's difficult, but that's where addicts have a hard problem or have a hard time. They're not used to things going well. And so it's real easy, if you're in that addiction, to, when something doesn't go well, it gives you an excuse, then I'm going to go back and do what I know makes me feel better. But they're not able to sort out, but it might make you feel better, but for how long? And does that disagree with anything that I told somebody I would or wouldn't do? Does it go along with the life that I swore that I'm going to do from this point on? And you see, that's where these guys are. And I'm not saying this to throw stones at them or to make fun of them. I'm not saying that to make fun of an addict either. I'm just saying, do we study our human nature, our very own and other people around us, enough that we learn something? Because I think we're kind of some of the craziest animals there are. We can think more than any other animal and reason and everything that way. But sometimes we get scared. We just run. Sometimes we don't know what to do. We just crawl in bed. Sometimes, we go back to what was familiar, or we try to get that spark back, or whatever it may be. And sometimes I think it's just important that we first of all go, God, what do you want? And I know it's real hard to hear from him at times. But then the second thing you go to is, what have I told you I would do? Because, folks, that's what's crucial, is that you do know what you've covenanted with him, what you've promised him, and is what you're about to do, does it line up with your promise with Christ or not? Because the devil is here the whole time, and if there's one thing that he loves to take advantage of, it's confusion. In our guys group Monday night, we saw that passage that says, just remember this, God is not a God of confusion. So when confusion comes, it is something that goes on in our mind, but the whole thing that's important is that we grab something to get our bearings straight. We check our compass to make sure we know what north is. We find that star in the sky to go, okay, that's the North Star. We go ahead and we look at our life and go, wait a minute, everything isn't out of place. A few things are different than I've ever experienced, but it's not everything. And the biggest question is, and where's God right now? Now, he may not feel like he's there, but we know the truth says he's everywhere, right? Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. He's there if we call upon him. And faith is believing what he said in spite of what we feel. And I share that with you, and I'm not trying to diss these guys. I'm just saying they reflect, I believe, very, very much a human nature that when you're confused, it's real easy just to go back and do something that you're familiar with. Does it make it bad? Not necessarily. It can be, but not necessarily. But it's not the best if it's contrary to what you promised God you would do. With me? So when Peter says, I'm going to go fish, they all jumped on because at least they felt like, I know we can do something productive and maybe we'll get some money, because otherwise how are we going to live and feed our families? So we'll go with you. So he went out and he got into the boat, but that night they caught how much? Nothing. Nada. Early in the morning, so this is an all-nighter. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but his disciples didn't realize it was Jesus. Now this is what's funny to me, because I don't know why John just doesn't come clean with it and say, I went too, because he was one of these sons of Zebedee, and I don't know why he didn't say, we caught nothing that night, and the next morning there's somebody on shore. Turned out it was Jesus, but we didn't know it was. And he called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? And this is where I always have fun, because to me and anybody I know that's a fisherman, when you get frustrated, you say more than you would normally. And usually, they're pretty salty already, right? He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? Friends, you catch anything yet, boys? And it says they said no. He doesn't say what else they said along with no, but I'm sure it was a definite no. No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and then you'll find some. Now, I'm not a big fisherman by any means, and I can even go to the point of saying it doesn't do much for me. I've been and I've had fun. I've been deep sea fishing and thought I was going to pitch my cookies and got everything settled back down or whatever that way, because that's not fun at all, that feeling of boom. Look at the horizon. I don't need to look at anything. Smile and you won't. And I'm like, yeah. Okay, but and I remember, catching, and so there's a cool part of it, but it's just like, I don't know, man, I got more things I'd rather do than fish. I'd really rather ride my Harley than I would fish, honestly, because it gives me more of a thrill. But anyway, these guys, it was the way that what they did. But if you're fishing and you don't catch anything, you're what? Frustrated, to say the least. So we're multiplying frustration. Frustrated, I would say, if they were honest with Jesus, what the crud are you doing, Lord? But I'm sure if you turn it around, that Jesus is a little bit frustrated. That what are you doing? And maybe you need to ask him that tonight. Lord, I'm frustrated here. What are you doing? But then do you have an answer for him? What are you doing? But nonetheless, so they're frustrated on top of frustration now because they went back to do what they know how to do, but nothing's working. And you can blame it on the nets, you can blame it on the old boat, you can blame it on this thing probably stinks, or you're making too much noise, or man, I don't know, or I told you we should have used chicken gizzards instead of this, or whatever it was, I'm presuming they were probably, since they were out at night, fishing off the top when the fish come up to eat the bugs and all that good stuff. But anyway, and then you get some smart aleck on the shore that cries out and said, you got anything? And they didn't. And that's both embarrassing and humiliating because it basically says, nope, I'm a loser. He said, well, throw your boat or your nets out on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. And I don't know about you all, but that doesn't make much sense to me. That's not very logical, is it? I mean, come on, really? So on this side of the pulpit, there are fish. On this side, there are none. I got my nets over here, and he says, hoist them in and throw them out on this side. You'll find some. Yeah, you and the fish you rode in on. I mean, it's like, come on. And I know this stuff's got to be going through their mind because, folks, they're just like you and me. They're still real. They're humans. And I'm telling you that sometimes God's got a real cool sense of humor, and sometimes cool can be like cruel, but it's not really. He allows us to feel frustration sometimes so that we realize, are you doing it with me or without me? Still partnered? Or you got this one now? You got life handled? And I mean, I don't want to do life without Jesus, do you? I mean, I want to break once in a while, but I don't want to do life without him. And a break usually means you're dead. So, I mean, I don't want to do life without Jesus because then it's something that it's more complete and it's thorough. And for every one of us that's a real believer, that's the way it ought to be, that if we start doing stuff without Jesus, we ought to feel like something's wrong. And so what he says, though, is throw it on the other side. I can't believe these guys weren't stubborn enough to say, forget it. But they did. They hoisted in. They tossed it on the other side. And this is when, it's just like, man, I can't imagine how you go from utter frustration to just this unbelievable joy and just freaking out going, man, we just hit the jackpot here. So he said, throw them on the other side, the right side of the boat, you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of a large number of fish. There's a bunch of fish in this net. Now, how does that happen? Well, it doesn't unless Jesus is involved, does it? Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, which is the guy right in the story, John, said, it's the Lord. He looked at Peter and goes, it's him. He's back. Now, it seems to me like this would have been a very cool time if he just walked out on the water to him. They would have known it was, oh, here he comes. He's doing that thing again, But that's what I love about Jesus. You really can't, it's not like he's a mathematical equation that you can he will always do this. I think that's what's so cool if you just want to have fun sometime. Just read through the Gospels and look at how many different ways that he healed. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he touched, sometimes he spit, sometimes he just isn't limited. Why? Because he didn't want any of us to think, oh, I've got the formula. And that's what's cool here, is he could have walked out on the water to him and they would have known it was him, but he wanted to prove a point. And he wanted them to see if they would get it. And wanted them to rethink, again, what was the last thing he told us to do, and what was the last thing we told him we would do. And so when they do this, they get the fish, they're excited, they're thrilled, because this is big bucks here. And on top of it all, it ended a full night of frustration. But Peter and John look at each other and go, it's the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and he jumped into the water. And any of you have heard me preach on this passage before, I always tell me, that's when you can tell that you're really kind of being whacked out here, because who turns around and puts clothes on to jump into the water? But that's what Peter did. It's like he's fallen all over himself. So he puts his clothes on, jumps into the water. The other disciples followed him in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they're not far from shore, about 100 yards. That's quite a ways if you're swimming like Peter is here, but they're about 100 yards off. When they landed, they saw a fire burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. So John just jumps to this. I mean, I'd like to fill in the blanks because my mind's going, whoa, man, what did they talk about during that 100-yard row? How did they hold those fish and the nets together? And wouldn't you be, with every stroke of the oar, wouldn't you be going, these nets are popping, man, I can hear them. You know, because if they're old nets especially, they've been sitting around for 3 or 4 years, you know. I mean, it's like, oh, man, are we going to make it or not? I hate to lose them now. Maybe somebody's smart enough to say, do you really think Jesus would have given us the fish if he's going to let our nets break? And isn't that the part of Christ that's totally miraculous? It's not just the thing that is the most obvious. It's all those things around it that he had to put into place and held together so that we get to experience the miracle. And nonetheless, it wasn't just about miracles. It was about men. It was about his brothers. It was about his comrades. It was about these apostles. All this was for their benefit. It really didn't have much to do with fish. Fish just became the object lesson for them to learn. And so they cranked them on in. And they got there, and the cool part was Jesus had this fire going, coals, so it had been burning for a while, and got down to the point where fish were on it. He'd even made some bread. Now, again, I just kind of think that he probably just, okay, Father, thank you for this stuff that you're about to do. Fire, fish, bread. You know, because Jesus really didn't need to eat anything. He's in this glorified body, but he knew they did. But it really seems to me, and maybe they were focused so much on fishing, but that they would have seen when it was that early morning type hours. Wouldn't you have seen if somebody lit a fire on the beach? You know? Smelled the smoke from 100 yards or something that way. But nonetheless, they got there, and Christ had this all going for it. Jesus said to them, he said, hey, bring me some of the fish that you just caught. I have always wondered, why? You got fish already that are there. Because he's wanting to make an object lesson. So Simon Peter climbed aboard. He dragged the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. But even with so many of them, the net was not torn. But Jesus said something about, get me some of those fish you just caught. So Peter goes running out there like Johnny on the spot here. Let me show you. And man, this thing that those guys could barely do all together, Peter went and grabbed it by himself and dragged the net on shore. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. And so it's just this bizarre thing. What do you want me to do? You want me to come in? He's got the breakfast already ready, but he wanted the fish there, just as an object lesson. And so he said to them, come and have breakfast. None of his disciples dared ask him, who are you? And I think what that implies is it's not like he was recognizable from the features. And that's good news for us too, because Jesus doesn't always look the same. And that's why even he talks about be hospitable to all people, because you never know when you're entertaining what? An angel unaware. But I'm more concerned about entertaining Jesus than an angel even, aren't you? But you see, it's this weirdness thing. It's, not predictable because it's not physical. And we think so physical, but what kingdom are we a part of? Spiritual. Jesus told them all along that the kingdom I've talked about is out of this world, but they kept wanting to make it in this world, a physical kingdom. It's what scrambled their brain when he died and all this stuff, and he didn't go ahead. And man, when are we going to win against the Romans and put them back in their place? And that was never the plan. Jesus said, no, it's this other kingdom. My will be done here, but it's going to be just like it's going to be in heaven. And I want us to grasp this because the fish are just here, but Jesus can make fish out of nothing. It's not about the fish. It's about you and me. It's about these guys. But their brains are still scrambled because it's like, I know it's the Lord because who else would do that? But at the same time, he doesn't look like he used to look. Now that messes with us, doesn't it? Because we get used to seeing people a certain way and we get attached to that. So much that we struggle to realize that all of this is changing, but not only that, but it won't be in heaven. It's the part you can't see that's going to be in heaven. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 12 when he explains the body, one party, many parts, and he's saying some of the parts aren't even seen. But they're the most important. That's your guts. And I'm not talking about, so in heaven we're going to see people's guts. No, but you're going to see faith and heart and love. I mean, I think the biggies in heaven are going to be the ones that love Jesus with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. I think that the ordinary ones are going to be the ones that thought they did. Now, that's just because of what he says. And I'll leave it up to him what he does. But he gives us a glorified body, just like he gave us the physical body he gave us. Did you get to vote on what you would look like? No. You won't get to vote what you look like there, other than what you do with your life. And so not only am I saying I think we ought to be aware that Jesus comes in packages sometimes that we're not expecting, but I want us to remember that we look at each other deeper than the skin. And I mean, when we talk to our kids about, man, it's beauty's only skin deep, blah, 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 and we go into all these things, we tell them that, but we don't believe it. Do we? I mean, we put a lot into the surface. And I wonder, in our time and attention, what it really does balance out to. Do you think it's a 50-50, 60-40, 80-20? How much do we put attention on the physical more than we put on our spiritual? How much do we build our character versus how much we're trying to build our body? There's only one thing that's going to go on from here, and it's not going to be our body. It's going to be our soul, or the real you. Not your physical pumping heart, but the heart represents the entire being. And so they can't recognize Jesus because they're used to looking. They're so ingrained with what he looked like that now that he doesn't look the same, it scrambled their mind. But if they listened to his voice and they heard from his mouth, not just the audible voice, but they saw the mannerisms and they saw the character of Christ coming out. Because didn't Jesus continually make food out of nothing? Didn't he continually meet people where their needs were? And were these guys, were they really needing to be able to catch fish, or were they really needing to be able to catch a glimpse of life again and understand what he'd called them to do and the mission that they had not yet completed? That's what he's after. Same way with you and me. He doesn't want us just to attend church. I, as a preacher, want you to attend church. But I really do, like Jesus, want you to grow in spiritual character. Your awareness of God that increases then your heart for God. And the great thing about it is that's when then people will not any longer just see the outward appearance. They'll begin to see that there's something about us. There should be light shining from us that has nothing to do with what we look like. But Jesus provided the fish. He provided the scenario. He met them where they were, but it was to take them where he is. And I just want you to understand that so with John, you can't tell me that this flashback didn't occur as he's hearing there's no sea. Because the big thing is, it doesn't make any difference what is there or isn't there as long as Jesus is there, right? I don't want to spend eternity without Jesus. If you and I are all together and Jesus isn't there, we're not going to even be as good of friends as we are right now. It's not going to be the same without Jesus. And that's what's important about us, is that what he's trying to get across to them. And so, with time going faster than I planned on, Jesus said, come and have breakfast. They didn't ask him. They knew it was Jesus. Verse 13, Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, did the same to the fish, just like he'd done with the loaves and the fish with the boy with 5,000, just like he'd done with the 4,000, just like he did with his body and blood, right? This was now the third time that Jesus had appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they'd finished eating, and I just kind of again wonder, was that an awkward conversation? Did they finally relax and we're not in trouble? He didn't come here to scold us or whatever? Because, there's something about eating and you get to, hey man, and how's it going? And where you been? Going around the world or what, And I wonder if Jesus told them, no, I went down to hell to preach a while down there first, but we don't know what he told them. But just as they were getting comfortable, it said they'd finished eating, and Jesus said to Simon Peter, he said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? Now, what was this guy's primary name that we know him by more than anything else? Peter, which meant what? Rock. Simon, he calls it. Simon was his family-given name. I want to say God-given, but family-given name, right? Peter became his name that Jesus gave him. But that was when Peter was going to be a rock and help the church, lead the other disciples, stand strong for God. But if you're going to be a fisherman, then you give up the name. You're no longer Rocky. You're back to Simon. He said, Simon, do you truly love me more than these? You tell me, what do you think these are? I think it's these fish. Because what did Peter go out to do? Go back to fishing. Do you love me more than these fish? Because what did the fish represent? Livelihood. Something he knew he could do because he'd done it before, which doesn't mean you can keep doing it just because you think you can, because some things pass. The fish represented finances. The fish represented then status, because your finances will buy you a certain status, and if he's going to become ingrained again with the other people along the Sea of Galilee and go back to fishing for a livelihood, sure, his wife would be thrilled that he'd get a real job, but it could be the friends. Because there's something about friends that's also very cool, and it's hard to sometimes, we see them as a gift from God, but if we're not careful, we begin loving them more than God. It could be about what the fishing brought, which was fame, fortune, those type of things. So I don't know what it was, but Jesus said, do you love me more than these? And I think he kind of left it open-ended because it could have been any one and every one of those things. But basically what he's saying is, how about you and me, Peter? Where am I at on your scale of importance and love? Peter said, well, yeah, Lord, you know I love you. Jesus said, well, if you do, you better feed my lambs, not fish. Boy, those two things don't cross over very well. It's not real easy to go from a fisherman to a shepherd. But Jesus is saying, man, take care of the baby Christians, man. Take care of these young ones in the Lord. Again, Jesus said to him, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He goes, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Jesus said, then take care of my sheep. So he went from the babies now to the bigger sheep. Take care of them. Feed them. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt. Hurt his feelings. I wonder if it already hurt Jesus' feelings. Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord. And here's where it was cool, because he did say, Lord. But he said, you know everything. I can't convince you when you know that you know. And you do know I do love you. And Jesus said again, then, feed my little sheep. I tell you the truth that when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. When you're old, you'll stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, what? So follow me. If you love me, I want you to follow me. But you see, this is what's important, because Jesus already told them in John 14, I'm going to a place. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to prepare a place, and I'll come back and get you. But they couldn't follow him to that place right now. One of the guys even said, Lord, where are you going? But here when he says follow him, what's he mean? He said, follow what I've told you to do. You've seen me do what I did. I began this, and I want you to continue it. Peter, you're the one that told me I'm the Christ, the Son of the living God. I told you that heaven revealed that to you. That didn't come from your brain as a man. That came from the Holy Spirit inside of you. He said, Peter, don't you remember the night that I washed your feet, the night you were talking about who's the greatest? You guys are still stuck in that. He said, don't you remember what I did that night? I not only washed your feet, but that was the night that I told you, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. But what? I've prayed for you. When you failed, return and strengthen your brothers. So it's a whole ball of wax, and Peter's getting it, but the rest of them are still there. And it's challenging them as well, just like it should still challenge you and me 2,000 years later. What about it? Have we ever said, Lord, I will, and we didn't? Are we somewhat confused in our life right now because we started but then we stopped? Have we used excuses? Well, I can't do that anymore because, or the Lord let me down, or I feel like I failed. Peter understands all that. And what I'm telling you is that's not a shame. That's instead, man, look and see. Jesus is still saying the same thing to you. He said, do you love me? Well, get back in gear. Do you love me? Come on. He's not questioning the love from a standpoint of, I don't think you love me enough anymore. It's not some husband and wife spat here. It's instead, it's Jesus just going, then mean what you say. I still love you. Nothing's changed. I still want to use you. I still developed you for this very purpose. But Peter, I'm not going to make you do it. You've got to want to do it. Do you love me? And the way you show Christ's love is by doing what? Showing little sheep love. Still the same. I don't know when the church started believing it was about coming and sitting. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong about coming and sitting, but that's only so we can fill up and feed up so we can go out and use it. It's about serving. It's not about doing whatever you want and Jesus will be there. It's about doing what he wants because you're no longer the same. It's not about doing it when it feels good. It's about doing it no matter what you feel. It's about faith. It's about, I believe and I will continue to do because I believe. I love and I will continue to do. I mean, I know some of you as parents have got to want to take a time out. But as far as I know, last I knew, that there's no timeouts with children raising children, is there? Even when they're in their 30s, there's still no timeout. It still keeps happening. And so, in this serving capacity, why did we allow the devil to hoodwink us into believing that serving somehow or another is dirty work? When instead it's the Lord's work. And so, do we love him? If we do, we'll find out he's the water. Go fishing in Jesus, not just fishing in the lake. Because he's there, and he wants to do things with us. He's got goals and aspirations for us. That you say, well, that's not fair. He puts on me more. No, it's because he designed you and knows what the capacity is within you as a human being, coupled now with his Holy Spirit. There's nothing that he's designed or that he's failed to build and put into you that you can't do when he's called you to it. So it isn't available, or it isn't ability, it's availability. And so this story, man, I mean, to me, it's just like, I get confused. I lose my way. Go back and do the familiar. Go back and do the familiar with the familiar. Let's go have an ordinary life. And I've actually had people tell me, I just couldn't do it anymore. I had to go back to a normal life. And I said, how's that normal life end when you die? I don't want to think about that. And I said, because you see, once you've tasted the abnormal life of spirituality, you got to know inside, I can't go back to being ordinary anymore. Because now the Spirit of God dwells in me. And I was designed by the Master's hand with the Master's plan. And God's got something for me to do. And I don't need to wet my finger and put it in the air to see which way the wind's blowing to decide. I just need to go back and remember whatever Jesus called me to do and whatever I already promised him I would do. And believe it or not, you'll be amazed at how balanced your life will suddenly become. And it doesn't have anything to do with your people around you and what they think. It has everything to do with you're in harmony with Christ and you're serving others. Father and God, tonight as we take communion, it's kind of like you breaking the bread and the fish. And I just find that amazing. I mean, man, these guys were big enough. They could have got their own fish and their own bread. And you're still serving them as a resurrected Lord. Feeding them, and they're grown men. But you only did those things because you wanted to touch them deep enough that they could touch others for you. Just like us. You want to touch us. God, I know when we're sick, we pray that you'd touch it. Put your healing hand upon us. But God, I pray you'll touch our minds as well, your healing hand upon our mind, that you'll touch us, Lord, and that we would then forevermore just know what you've said, what you've called us to do, and be glad to do it, knowing that even if it looks like absolute failure to the world and this earth, obedience to you, Lord, is absolutely glorifying. Surrender is blessed. Serving is rewarded. And so, Lord, tonight as we remember that you were the sacrifice as well as the servant, and we take this body and this blood of yours, God, there's not a one of us worthy other than Jesus because of your blood and your calling and your love. But tonight, may we not just take what you give us, may we give it back to you. May we give our body and our blood back to you for as long as we shall live. In the name of Christ, amen.